Welcome to Tramlines, a podcast from Agri. I'm your host, Tony Smith, putting your questions to the experts. In this episode, we're talking to Mark Dews, Sustainable Farming Lead at Agri. Today, we're going to be asking some key questions about direct drilling. What are the benefits? What are the pitfalls? And what can we learn from others who are already adopting these techniques? Hi Mark, and it's great to welcome you back to Tramlines. So Mark, when we're talking about direct drilling, what are the actual specific cultivation techniques that we're referring to?
Well, when we're talking about direct drilling, then we think about moving as little soil as we possibly can in order to put seed in contact with the soil. When we're having conversations about direct drilling, they often stretch into strip tillage and minimum cultivations. But in its truest sense of the term, then direct drilling is moving the least soil we can possibly get away with.
And why is this topic so top of mind? I mean, we were at Groundswell recently, and that's the talk of the town. That is what everyone's talking about. Why is it so top of mind?
So direct drilling or minimal soil disturbance is one of the key principles of regenerative agriculture. So that's one reason, and that is around about the preservance of soil health. So the less we disturb those soil biological communities, then the less damage that we do to them, and the more that they can build and give us those soil health benefits that we're all so keen on. There are other reasons. Some people are particularly keen on direct drilling as a means of reducing costs, and particularly diesel costs. We all know about the energy price inflation and the cost of diesel. Both economically and environmentally. There's no doubt that direct drilling systems use less fuel than full cultivation systems. So those are the key reasons really around about preserving soil health and reducing carbon emissions, both through the diesel that we use in working the soil, and also the oxidization of the organic matter in the soil that occurs when we move more soil.
Okay, so in the immediate short term, we're talking about saving some costs here. What's the difference in terms of the number of passes that you're going to see in terms of a traditional cultivation techniques compared to what you're talking with, direct drilling?
That is a really wide spectrum of answers. So I go back to one of the farms I remember when I first started this job that I worked on. I think I remember them saying that they'd been 13 times over one field in order to get a seed bed. And going back to that same farm now, I think we would go either once or twice. So that's the kind of the breadth of it. And once is what people are aiming at. But then, as we said, that kind of breadth of situation means that some people are doing other things to make the system work. So you might go with the plan of being a direct driller, but you might still need some subsoiling or some soil loosening in order to allow your system to be successful, particularly in the earlier years of the adoption of it. So it may be that your soil isn't yet ready to be direct drilled with no other inputs, and you might require a little bit of soil loosening to reduce some compaction, to allow a little bit of water infiltration. There may be some soil pans to break through, and it's also the case that soil crop residue sometimes still needs a little bit of work before those biological communities, the earthworms and all the other stuff that lives in the soil, is capable of breaking down the residue from the previous year's crop. Then often we get some benefits from mixing a little bit of that crop residue with the soil in order to get better crop establishment. But those are often stepping stones towards a full direct drilling system, where the objective would be to only pass over the ground in order to put the seed there.
Okay, so there's a relative journey there in terms of that transition, isn't there, from moving from potentially many times travelling across that field to then moving towards, as you said, that goal of one pass. But that takes a bit of time. If I can just pick that apart a little bit, Mark, if we're looking at a farm, let's say it's a medium loam, and they're using a more traditional approach in terms of cultivation, how long in terms of seasons would it take to get to that goal of maybe that one pass?
I think realistically, 5 years isn't very long, and 8 and 10 years would be quite realistic about the time over which you might hope to get to a point where you don't need to do all that additional stuff. And it depends hugely on what else you're doing. So, how much organic matter there is in the soil to start with. What is your rotation? We often find with direct drilling, then the easier crops are things like oilseed rape and first cereals, so first wheat after beans or oilseed rape. Those are often some of the easiest places to achieve successful direct drilling. And that's often about the crop residue. So oilseed rape can tolerate quite a trashy seed bed, and there is much less crop residue to deal with after oilseed rape or beans. But second cereals, so second wheats in particular, are often the points at which people trip up with direct drilling, and it's a lot about the crop residue.
Mm-hmm.
And also grass weeds. Grass weed legacies. So if you have a moderate population of blackgrass in a first wheat, and then rely solely on direct drilling, then unless the chemical control is very good, then that can build to an unmanageable level in a second wheat crop.
Sure. So I just want to stick with some of the, if you like, the benefits, the upside of moving to this these techniques. You mentioned costs and the diesel. Is there a big difference in terms of costs associated with, wearing parts, earth moving parts that, if you pass over that field several times, presumably, your machinery costs itself are going to be much higher than a single or reduced number of passes?
Yeah, certainly. Alongside diesel will be labour and steel and all those other associated depreciation, all of those associated costs with moving soil, and looking at the other benefits, the benefits of moisture retention. The less we move the soil, then the less exposed that soil is to drying out in dry autumns and dry periods. But it does come back to establishment. When we can achieve successful establishment through direct drilling alongside good grass weed control in particular, then the benefits do tend to accrue.
Sure. I know that you were very keen to talk about reducing traffic. Why is that so important?
So cultivations, the reason why many of us have cultivated soil for a very long time is because it alleviates some of the problems that we put there in the first place. And a lot of that compaction can occur during the harvesting and the straw recovery process. So if we've got combines running all over the fields, we've got grain trailers, we've got balers, we've got straw trailers, we've got loaders. And so that's why we're doing a lot of the cultivation that we do, is to alleviate that compaction, to provide a level seed bed and one which will allow water infiltration throughout the year. But if we can avoid that traffic damage, if we can limit that traffic damage, and that's what a lot of people are trying to do with controlled traffic systems, then we can limit the amount of soil that is damaged and would then need to be have remedial cultivations applied to them. That's a difficult thing to do, to match up all of your machinery so that you are only running on certain parts of the field. And probably more so than that is the discipline that's required for all of the drivers who go into the field.
Yeah, very good points. And in terms of the longer term goals of reducing carbon emissions rather, and towards that net zero, which actually we've covered also in other podcasts here on Tramlines, what's the contribution? How does this help us with that goal?
When the benefits do occur, then it's really about sequestering more carbon and releasing less carbon from the organic matter in the soil, because we're not moving it. But that all hinges and depends upon us not having a yield penalty through adopting a different system. So we can reduce the gross emissions through the ways that we're talking about, not moving the soil, so we're not oxidizing the organic matter, we're using less diesel, so we're emitting less there. But if you talk then about the carbon dioxide equivalent per ton of production, if we produce less tons per hectare, then we're at risk of actually increasing our carbon footprint for each ton of production. So the key is to make sure that when we're making those overall reductions in emissions, we're not losing significant amounts of yield as well.
Yeah, sure. So some of the pitfalls, you sort of hinted at one or two of them. Grass weeds was one. And the importance of crop residue management. Tell us a bit more about why is that so important?
So yeah, grass weeds. We've talked a lot about grass weeds as agronomists in the past, and we will continue to do so. And that's about the seed burden. So if we're popping a lot of seed down from a weed population in a crop, then we've got to deal with all of that seed into the following crop. And if you can't use cultivations to culturally control some of those things, some of those weeds, then we're going to have a bigger burden on the chemical approach to weed control. So we kind of know where we're at, I think, with grass weeds. With crop residue management, a wheat crop with lots of straw, if you want then to grow a second wheat on the same field, then you've got to find a way of putting the seed in contact with the soil. And if there's a mat of chopped straw there, then we need then to cut through that somehow and in some cases, particularly in the earlier years of transition, then I think that it is perfectly reasonable to go and do some shallow mixing of that chopped straw with the soil in order to get the seed to soil contact you need for good establishment. Where we do see problems, I think, is hairpinning is what we'll all talk about. Then, particularly with disc drill systems, then a mat of chopped straw, the disc comes through, cuts a groove in the soil, which folds a wodge of chopped straw into that groove, then pops the seed in there next to it. And chopped straw is a really poor medium for growing wheat in. Soil is great, chopped straw is bad. Now, if our system means that we can't cut through that chopped straw, then we will limit the establishment and limit the performance of that crop. And so that comes back down to how do we manage that crop residue? How good is the chop on the combine? If we're baling the straw, can we be sure that we're baling all of that swath of straw and that we're not leaving 20 or 30% of the fine chopped straw, fine straw that falls through the swath and then leaves as a streak of small straw fragments behind the combine? All of those things are become really important if we're not relying on the crutch of cultivation to mitigate those problems.
So, we do have to get the detail right, is what I'm hearing. And what you're also talking about is really understanding what happens on your farm with your particular systems, your way of managing the straw and stubble, the machinery that you've got, the setup. All of those things are really integral to giving that crop the best chance of a good establishment. That's what I'm hearing from you. Have I got that right?
Absolutely, yeah. And the answers will be different on different farms according to what machinery they have and the rotation in particular. But the principles are about establishment. That's the whole. Direct drilling is about establishing a crop, and if the resulting establishment isn't great, then the performance of that crop won't be great. And that's we need to avoid putting the problems into the system that cultivating removes if we're not going to cultivate.
Yeah, very, very good top tips and very clear in my mind there, what you're saying to us. Okay, so kit costs money. I was at Groundswell and looking at some of the beautiful, shiny new kit. It looks incredible. I could see all the farmers and growers looking at that, and asking lots of questions at the demos. So, this sounds like a big capital investment. Mark, is there an easy way through for farmers who are looking to try out these techniques maybe for the first time?
I think the easiest situations are where you've got a large farm where there is a depreciated set of kit that's ready for renewal. And then you say, okay, we need to change this equipment anyway. This is an opportunity to invest in some high capacity, new, technologically marvelous equipment. And there's plenty of choice out there. There's some wonderful equipment, and there's been some really strong kind of evolutions of technology that are available now that weren't available 5 or 10 or 20 years ago. But that's not everybody's situation, and quite often people will want to dip their toe in the water and move into this gently. And there is a lot of equipment out there that can be put into use. There's a lot of second-hand equipment that can be used very successfully, and for quite a lot of farms. So we talked about the rotation position, and maybe the place for direct drilling on a farm that hasn't done it before is in their first weeks. You know, if you've got some nice bean stubble that you're happy to direct drill into, then it may be that you could go and buy or use a contractor to establish an area of your farm.
You know, you talked a lot about the different techniques, but also about what's right for your individual farm and indeed parts of that farm and the individual crops. So Mark, how does a farmer, where do they go to get that advice or to get that insight as to what's going to work well for them?
I think it's important to remember that every mistake that has ever been made has been made by lots of different people. And what we want to do is try to reduce the number of those mistakes that get made by ourselves, by our colleagues, by our peers. And if we can share that knowledge through your agronomist, through you visiting open days, through talking to your neighbours, through Base UK, those kind of forums where we can compare our experiences and be honest about what works and what doesn't, then we'll start to make it easier for those people who are less far down the transition path. And I think we just need to talk about it really widely and also be really honest about the things that don't work and talk about the mistakes that we've made and what we have done and what we're going to try to do to mitigate for those mistakes.
So essentially what you've just said is that we can learn from each other.
I know, and truthfully, that is the future for systems improvements, or for the sharing of systems improvements kind of knowledge and expertise is from farmer to farmer. You know, we can facilitate that as agronomists. We can share what we've learnt on one farm to another one, and we can act as that kind of knowledge exchange conduit sort of thing. But it's the farmers who are getting the experience, and it doesn't. This sort of advancement, technological advancement, doesn't come very much through R&D and trials. It comes through people's trial and error on farms, I think.
Okay, thank you, Mark. You know, I'm going to ask this final question. We do this at the end of every Tramlines podcast. It's been fascinating listening to all of your great advice. But what is going to be your top tip to growers and farmers listening today?
I'm going to re-emphasize the point about establishment, and we need the plants in the square meters. You know, we need if the crop's too thin and there are too few ears per square meter, they won't yield. So I think we have to be realistic about what the establishment rate is likely to be, and compensate for that with either some mitigating activities like a bit of cultivation, or with seed rate, or a combination of the two, and appreciate the amount of variability there might be within that field. So get the establishment rate, get a realistic idea of what your establishment rate is likely to be, and then build that into your system.
Thank you, Mark, for a really interesting discussion about direct drilling. You may also find some of the other podcasts about soils and regen agriculture valuable here on Tramlines. That's it for this podcast, but do tune in again as we meet the experts throughout the season, exploring the many immediate and longer-term questions for growers and farmers in the UK. If you have any questions that you'd like us to ask the experts, email info@agri.co.uk. See you next time.